Hello and welcome to another How to Get Published webinar. We will be starting in a few seconds. I'm just going to allow a few more people to come in. We are recording this session. If you are unable to watch the whole session, we can. It will be available on YouTube after the webinar, and there is also a live stream currently going onto YouTube. So just a few more seconds. Okay, I think we are ready to start. So we have set up a poll at the bottom of your page. If you don't mind sharing that information with us, if you could fill out that poll, that would be great. So we know what your experience of mentorship is, and we can address your questions a little better. And I can see everyone's already filling that out. Thank you so much. And I will also now just introduce to you our team today. So we have Jessica Lepowski, who is a publishing editor on the Sage Journal's editorial team. She works closely with editors and societies to help navigate the publishing process and develop key strategies. We also have Dr. Janet Salmons, who manages the SageMethodsBase.com blog community and is the author of Doing Qualitative Research Online. She has extensive experience as a mentor to doctoral students and emerging researchers. Next, we have Maite Enriquez, who is editor-in-chief of Hispanic Healthcare International, the official journal of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses. She is professor and associate dean for graduate education at Research College of Nursing. We also have Aidan Wright, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Pittsburgh. Over the past decade, he has mentored trainees at the undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral levels. He is currently an associate editor at the journals Clinical Psychological Science and the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And he is the incoming editor-in-chief of the Journal of Psychopathology and Clinical Science. And finally, there's me, Maria Tissot. I am marketing manager in the author marketing team at Sage, and my work focuses on helping early career researchers get published. So the session today will be a little bit more free-flowing than the previous sessions we've had, if you've come to some of our webinars before, as we would like to answer as many of your questions as possible around mentorship. So please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to send your questions in, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Also, if we run out of time and we can't answer your question, don't worry, we'll still address them to you. We will email you after the webinar with an answer as well. So I will now hand it over to Jessica to start the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Maria, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you that are joining us. We're excited to have you here today. So this is just a general overview of the publishing process, and today with mentorship, we'll be covering kind of a little bit of everything, because mentorship really spans that publishing process, so that you and your mentor or mentee can be working together to secure funding, write or edit your article, maybe even on the peer review element. So we're really excited to dive into this topic today. We've got a great panel of speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Janet to speak very briefly on what is a mentor.
We wanted to kind of frame our discussion here today by starting with the definition. So here we just have a simple definition: an experienced person who advises and helps someone with less experience. So this definition kind of emphasizes that one person has knowledge and experience in a topic that they are then going to use to support someone else. Next slide. And here, thinking a little bit more about, kind of coming from my own, I'll admit, biases and my experience, say, at its best, we're really looking for a transformative relationship, not a transactional, I'll give you this and you give me that, but, something that really, takes that relationship to another level. It's different than coaching or supervising. It's not only about meeting particular goals. It's really about, assisting the other person to, to find, their strengths and to, see kind of where they can go. And I think of this kind of going a little step further than the previous definition as the kind of three main areas. One is kind of characteristics of how we are, being generous, being creative, being respectful of, both sides, from the mentor to the mentee and back. Then the doing side, that you're able to communicate in a timely fashion, be efficient, be collaborative, move the thing forward. I mean, if we have a mentor who is not responding or a mentee who is not responding, it just adds to the frustration and kind of takes away from some of that rapport. And then knowing, we need to have, as that previous slide said, the expertise and experience, in the subject matter. So here, we would want to have the experience in writing, publishing, editing, all of those stages, so that we, can give them, some of those informal tips that you're not going to find in a book, but that you learn from experience. So, rather than having to, learn the hard way every time, that perhaps we can learn from someone else. Next slide. And just, to encourage you to think that, we not only need to find mentors and to look for, people who, can help us to move forward, even if we feel very confident about what we're doing. It's still really valuable to have a mentor to help, see where you might want to go next. And then, even if you are new, even if you were, a doctoral student, an early career person just starting out, there are things that may be helpful to someone else. How can you be a mentor? So, if we think about this, I put it in this kind of cycle as this kind of a cycle of learning and teaching and sharing that exists both within and outside of institutions. Next slide. And we're also here talking, about both kind of institutional mentoring, where it could be that your doctoral supervisor is called a mentor. It could be that, as a new faculty member, you are linked with a mentor in your institution to kind of help you get acclimated to a new position. Or it could be it's a more informal relationship that is, someone that, you found on your own, you strike up a relationship and, they take that kind of role with you. Is there anything any of the other panelists want to add about either of these types? Please just jump in. The main difference that, we want to kind of emphasize today is that in an institutional type of mentoring, someone, the institution has set some kind of a framework for how that relationship should go, that, there are roles, there are expectations, there are boundaries, and, there's a mode of interaction that, is expected. So, you have something, that framework is already in place, whereas with an informal mentoring, then, we need to establish those kinds of things, ourselves on a more, one-to-one basis. So, those two types vary a lot when it comes to, say, troubleshooting, when a problem arises, or in, getting things done within a certain time frame, et cetera. So I think now we want to, unless my other panelists would like to add anything to those definitions, we'd like to open it up to questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I completely agree with all of that, and it's whether it's something formal or informal, just being open and transparent about expectations and the goals and how we can work together. I've been both a mentor and a mentee, and oftentimes both at the same time because they serve so many different roles. So and obviously within the publishing process, there are many different opportunities for that mentor and mentee role. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides now so we can see the whole panel here and start looking at the questions coming in.
Yes, so I can see we have had a few very good questions, so I will address them to the panel, and please jump in if you'd like to answer it. So I think this is a very interesting one, which is, what is the difference between a mentor and a supervisor?
Yeah, I can maybe take a shot at that, and other folks can chime in if they'd like. I think that supervisors versus a mentor, supervisors tend to be a more constrained or specific relationship that have a specific focus. So one thing I'm thinking about is often there are clinical supervisors that provide feedback and training typically in a one-on-one capacity for a specific purpose, and within that purpose, it's almost like a very specific training relationship. Whereas a mentor really provides more broader training and development of the individual. Certainly it's going to be somewhat constrained in the sense that a mentor is not going to be likely not to be covering every aspect of your life, but you might have a professional mentor that touches on every aspect of your professional development, whereas a supervisor may just be focused on one portion of training or something like that. As a question that was raised previously too, and I started answering by typing before realizing that's probably not the right thing to do here. There may be something with a quid pro quo with some sort of payment with a supervisor, where there's an hourly rate for pay, and as Janet pointed out in the beginning, that mentors typically are not paid specifically for that role. That's something that exists outside of their other compensation.
Apologies.
I would say that sometimes I don't know if the question, what type of supervisor the person is asking about. So for instance, I've been a dissertation supervisor many times. And in that role, I also feel like I'm a mentor to the student. So I think sometimes the roles can overlap. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure who asked the question, but it does vary. And I'm still a mentor to some of my students that I was their dissertation supervisor now that, as they've moved through their careers. So it's a lot of fun when you can be a mentor to someone for a long time. That's one of the benefits of getting old, I guess.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I can see there's a question here about what indicates that a particular pair will be a successful one when it comes to mentorship. What signs are you looking for? How do you know that?
I think, in terms of especially in an informal type of mentor situation, there's a little bit of magic involved. You think like, how do you know that someone's going to be a good friend? Maybe that you've got certain things in common, but it may be that, one of my closest friends you know, we're like totally different, you know, it's like, you know, so I think that, you know, it's kind of a hard question to answer. But on the other hand, I think, you know, say if you're someone who is thinking, you know, I'm at a stage in my life where I need, you know, I want somebody to give me some guidance. You know, maybe you've been in a more institutional, you had a dissertation supervisor, you had faculty, now you're out in the world and you're thinking, you know, I want that, you know, someone who is more mature in the field than I am, to then, you know, really think about, you know, what are you looking for? I mean, are you looking for someone who's going to help you specifically on writing skills, writing and publishing, or is it more almost conceptual? You know, I don't know what kind of research is going to get me ahead in my field, you know, that's those kind of really, you know, bigger questions. Or maybe it's even, how am I going to balance being a mother or a father and being an academic? I mean, I see a lot of discussion about that today. So it could be more, you know, on the personal side, you know, think about what it is, you know, you're looking for, so that, you know, if you talk with someone and say, you know, I really admire, you know, Aidan, I really admire, you know, what you have done, you know, as an editor, and I look at, you know, how you've moved from this stage of your career to this stage, you know, would you be willing to, you know, spend some time with me and share some of that, because I have some of those kind of goals too. Whereas if you just go to someone and say, gee, would you be my mentor, you know, and they're thinking, you know, I'm busy, like, how could I, you know, so I think, you know, having both, it's sort of giving you a two-sided answer. On one hand, being open that it might be, there may be some unexpected magic that makes it happen. But on the other hand, be clear about what it is that you want and what you're looking for, what your expectations are, so that, you know, the person you're trying to engage with, you knows how to respond.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, already fantastic response. It might be someone that you know. It might be someone already in your institution or a colleague, but it could be someone that you don't know or you want to get to know, or that you met at a conference and you, like Janet said, you really admire. So coming forth with the qualities or characteristics or values that you've thought about what you're looking for in a mentor or a mentee relationship, and then providing that connection. And like Janet said, it might ultimately be that magic, just like having a friendship or what have you. It's being clear with those expectations, and someone might be busy and they may not have the time to devote to that mentorship at that time, but it doesn't mean that the door is closed forever. And so keeping those open lines of communication, and it could be something that maybe it's a check-in once a year and just having a conversation on the goals. So coming back to those expectations that Janet mentioned, clearly identifying what you're looking for before going into that mentor or mentee role.
I would like to add that there are also formal opportunities that you can look for, and I'll just use myself as an example. So about 4 years ago, when I transitioned to being a journal editor, I found a mentor through the International Nurse Editors Association, and they have a mentoring program. And I had an excellent mentor for a year. And so those opportunities exist as well. So I think just what everyone was talking about, you have, what specific type of mentor are you looking for? I was looking for a really experienced journal editor that would be willing to be my mentor. And of course, someone who had already volunteered to be in that program is someone who would already have committed the time. So it was a wonderful relationship.
Well, one of my colleagues who did a different webinar with me recently, who had recently retired and was thinking, you know, I want to give something back, contacted his alma mater, and, you know, was connected with a program that linked alums, you know, experienced alums with either students or recent grads who were looking for a mentor. So, you know, if you're someone who is either, you know, on the recent grad side, or, you know, someone who is thinking, you're right. I would like to give something back. I would like to help the next generation and the new people who are struggling, perhaps, through your academic institutions, they may have some of that kind of matchmaking opportunity.
Yeah. The one other thing that I might add is that, past behavior is a really good predictor of future behavior. And if you have someone that you've identified that has been a good mentor to others, they're likely to be a good mentor or have mentorly qualities that would be good for you too. And sometimes you may not know, but asking around, especially if it's a type of mentoring relationship where you might be tied to this person for a long time, make sure you ask about their prior trainees and mentees and get a sense for how they work and what they focus on, and whether they're the type of the person who prioritizes the trainee or the mentee's career and so forth.
I think, yeah, those are all very good points. And actually, one of the questions that we had here, which you have all kind of touched on, but maybe if you could expand a little bit more, is that, someone says here that they have found there's a general reluctance from faculty to act as mentors, and whether there are any suggestions for graduate students of how to encourage faculty to act as mentors. Do you have any recommendations or advice for this attendee?
Again, I would say, to be very specific about what you're looking for. I mean, especially if you're a student within an academic institution and you're appealing to a faculty member, is not teaching a course you're in, someone who is just simply on the faculty, you're asking them to basically, work for free to do something more than they're already doing. And, especially post-pandemic, people are pretty much like up to here, just getting through the day. So, being very specific, I want to get my first article published, and, you've published a number of articles, would you be willing to meet with me, to talk about X? And then you can see, does it, then if you've met and talked about X, could you say, well, would you be willing to meet with me again when I get to the next stage of this process, and just see how it goes, rather than thinking like, oh, will you be my, my long-term, career guide, it might just be too overwhelming.
Yeah, I really want to second what Janet is saying there, because I think she really hit the nail on the head. And I think that if someone approaches with a sort of a formless, broad request, hey, will you mentor me? That's very amorphous, difficult to understand what that entails, and it's open-ended. And so it's the kind of thing that would make me very reluctant. But if you come and say, I have a specific project that I was hoping to get some help on, would you work with me on that? It certainly serves as something that you can start with, see how that goes, and who knows where it will go from there. Maybe it stays to that, and maybe it blossoms into something beyond that. Or I am often approached by, in this capacity, to work on, hey, I have an idea, I'd like to develop it into a fellowship. You've mentored prior fellows before. Can you help me do that? And then I know what my role is. I provide examples, I provide feedback. And again, maybe it gets funded, maybe it doesn't. We see where it goes. But just like Janet said, a very specific project to work on is a great way to start out.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think we've been talking about a lot from the point of view of the mentee, but we've got a question here that would address a question from a mentor, and it is about where do you draw the line between professional support you give to your mentee and other types of support, such as financial, moral, religious, emotional. How do you draw that line?
Well, if I could maybe make that a somewhat of a broader question still, that's a pretty broad question, but to make it somewhat broader, so I can answer it the way that might start to inform that more specific question. I think that mentees are, the mentoring relationship is a developmental one, and mentees come at different developmental stages. And what, a first-year graduate student or a first-year undergraduate student needs is very different from what that same person will need 2, 3, 4 years down the line, as they develop skills. And so I think one of the more important tasks for a mentor is trying to figure out what will this trainee or mentee need from me, and where are they developmentally. So the type of feedback you might give on a publication for someone who it's their first publication might be different from, or well, hopefully is very different from something that you're giving for someone on their 10th publication. And still both might need help and might need guidance, but just very different kind. And so I think adopting taking this principle of finding out what does this person need from me, and is it something that I can provide, and where are their needs developmentally, who are they? And the other part about this is them as individuals. Some people are very different from each other. Some people overwork, some people underwork. Some people find that are very outgoing, some people are very withdrawn, and each of these individuals require different things. And so I think that the broader context is figuring out what does this individual need from me in this mentoring relationship, where they are at their career stage developmentally, who they are as an individual. That sort of sets the context for then following up with the question that you have about where would you draw the line, and which I think is related, although it certainly has a different aspect of it. So, but I'll start with that and let others have a chance to talk.
It might, if you feel that the mentee is, I don't want to say this in a negative way, but kind of taking advantage of your relationship in a way that goes beyond what you're comfortable with, then maybe it's time to say, I'm getting ready to start some new projects myself, and I need to set some. It would be good to revisit our agreement about how we're going to work together moving forward, and and then establish those boundaries. That's like as I was trying to differentiate in my introduction between an institutional setting where a lot of those boundaries are already set, or they're in writing somewhere, but when it's an informal relationship, then, it's up to you. And I mean, as the mentor in that relationship, I think, it's up to you to say, well, gee, I can help you with A and B, but C and D is beyond the scope of what I'm able to do. Is that okay with you? Do you still want to go forward? And just, set the boundaries that you're comfortable with. On the other hand, if you're open to, that more personal relationship, and, for a lot of people, the issues they're dealing with are the kind of life work balance, and, how do I fit this into everything else in the world, or anxieties they've got, and things that would be outside of like strictly moving through a project. If you're comfortable with that, then good, but maybe you need to refer if the person is really, got a lot of other problems that are beyond the boundaries of what you can do, maybe that's a time when you can refer someone. And as a trusted mentor, hopefully someone would respond to that, to say, since your mother died, you've really had a hard time focusing on your work, but that's not something I can help you with. This kind of service would be useful, whether it's on the campus or whatever.
Thank you, Janet, for that. There is a question here as well about how do you know that you're ready to take on the role of a mentor? Are there any specific skills that you should be trying to develop? And do you have any advice for that?
If I may,
Well,
I think that really at any stage of your career, you can be a mentee or a mentor, but it's focusing on your strengths and what you, so if you're becoming a mentor, it's focusing on your strengths and what you can bring to the table. You know, you could be in your fellowship or your residency and working with someone just starting out and kind of sharing your experience and what you've been through. But maybe you haven't published yet. And so that's where you might need someone to, you might need to find a mentor at that point. So it's, I think it's really focusing on those strengths that you bring to the table. Oh, sorry, Aiden, I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was, I think that all makes really good sense to me. And I think and that's a good question to ask yourself. You know, what do I have the capacity to do? Although I think that oftentimes if you focus only on what you feel really comfortable with, you might be doing yourself a disservice because you probably could stretch a little. And that gets to the point that I was thinking of making, that you know, mentoring is a skill like any other. And so there are going to be some people who have natural talents and some people who have to work at it more, but I think all of us have to work at it and practice in it. And it's something that develops over time, and you want to put thought into and work at it, as opposed to just, you know, just doing it and seeing how it goes. And so, you know, in the context of my lab, for instance, we often do undergraduate theses where the graduate students work with the undergraduates as sort of the first line mentor, with me supervising both, but the graduate students mentoring. And you know, I think that at first the graduate students maybe wonder, well, is this just so he doesn't have to do as much work? And there may be some truth to that, but they in truth be told, they often come away saying, wow, that was really helpful for me, because you know, now I have a much better perspective of what it's like to try and figure out, where do I need to meet this person? What do they need from me? What do they need to keep their project going, and that sort of thing. And for me, that highlights that it really is something you need to practice.
I think, you know, be realistic. You know, what do you have the bandwidth to commit to another person in terms of time, et cetera, to do, you know, what is needed. And, you know, as someone who is new to being a mentor, maybe you need to be a little bit more formal than you might otherwise be, to say, you know, before we start working together, you know, let's just take some time to talk about our process. You know, if you send me an email, you know, how quickly do you expect me to respond? How often do you want to meet? You know, what specific area do you want to focus on, so that, you know, you've got some real, you know, clarity there. We will, in some of the follow-up resources, you know, we've got some materials about mentoring that I think will be helpful to someone who is thinking about that. And I think that what you're talking about, Aiden, is, you know, the perfect way, you know, that it's not only there's mentoring, and there's also collaboration. Sometimes a mentoring relationship can become a collaborative relationship where, you know, you're working together with others. And it's not only a US cultural thing, even though we are, this panel happens to be US based. You know, there's a real bias towards, you know, individual performance, like I will succeed, you know, at all costs, and whatever happens to anybody else, versus saying, like, you know, it's better if we do this together. And, you know, so I think, you know, being a mentor and having a mentor is, you know, really good preparation for being a good co-author, a good co-researcher, and, you know, someone who is going to be able to bring your best to it and bring out the best in someone else, so that, you know, you're doing something that's what, you know, what I said earlier, that's the transformational rather than the transactional of, like, you do this, I do that. It's like, no, together it's something that's much, you know, more significant.
Yes, that's actually, I think, leads us really well to the next question. which is, sorry, I had it here and it's just moved. Someone's asking whether the speakers could talk a little bit about your first time acting as a mentor, I suppose what the challenges were and what you've learned since. Who would like to start?
Oh, I can go first. I've been at this a long time. I think what I've learned is, and someone mentioned this, for me, it's really important to make sure there's a commitment from both parties and to set up some type of schedule, if you will. I mean, most of my mentoring relationships, the mentee has a specific goal, a specific need, a specific objective, and that really works for me. I'm going to start mentoring someone actually next Thursday, and it is her first time to publish. She just got her PhD, but she's just learning, about publishing. English is an additional language for her. I do mentor a lot of English as additional language because that's also how I started. So, we have a schedule set. We're going to meet on Thursdays, every Thursday, during the fall semester. And, she has a goal to get 2 manuscripts done this semester. And so that really works for me. And I've kind of learned that the hard way instead of starting with, gee, what are we going to do? And so I don't know, that just really works for me. And it seems to work for the mentees as well. And then we really have goals and we have a timeline and we find a time, for instance, we're going to meet in the morning because I write better in the morning. And so, if it was someone that was a night owl, I don't know if I would be the best mentor for that person.
I think the most powerful lessons that I received were, I had a mentor in my master's program. So it was a formal institutional mentorship within that program. But he, started to kind of reflect back to me to say, well, Janet, you have this combination of skills that are unique. Most people either have this side or this side, but not like both together. You need to focus on that. So it was not about getting my thesis done, which was, his formal role, but it really, really helped me. It was not just that it was a compliment that I thought, oh, well, aren't I special? But, it kind of went like, okay, well, that, he recognized a strength in me that I hadn't identified or didn't recognize. And so that made me think, that's how I want to be, as a mentor to others. So, really trying to kind of read between the lines of what we're doing and, look for ways that I could be affirmative to the person. And I think that kind of, trust building is essential. So then, when I was in a role which was called a mentor as a dissertation supervisor, but it was called a mentor and truly, in my case, was that broader role, just the way that because of, having that positive experience myself, I found that, I could be like tearing the person's stuff to shreds and they would thank me because they trusted me and they knew that I had their best interest at heart. Whereas, if you had just done that as my job is to get your thing ready to publish or to get your dissertation ready to be accepted, then, the person might be going like, this person is, and she's so mean and, everything. Instead going like, she knows what quality is. And if mine's not measuring up, I'm going to go the extra mile because I want my stuff to be at that level of quality. So, there's that personal dimension that I think, has to do with trust and sometimes, stepping outside of that formal role to reflect back to someone, something that might really help them to kind of understand themselves. Because, we're all, I read so many posts from people who are talking about imposter syndrome and about their just kind of, fear that, I'm not going to fit in. Somehow there are other people that are better than me. They've got it like I don't, so I think, as a mentor, starting to think like, well, if those are not qualities that I'm accustomed to, how can I practice those with my friends? Or how can I, what can I do to build up that, ability to be kind of frank and candid with someone in a way that's going to build their trust?
Yeah, that I think the example, funny that you gave there, really reminds me of something a previous mentor said to me, where he said, I promise to always work in your best interest, but I can't promise that it will always feel good. And that sort of dovetails with the point I was thinking of in response to this question, which was, when you're first starting out and you think, you may stop and say, oh shoot, what do I do? How do I make this work? You might start with just saying, well, what are some of the things that mentors have done with me that I felt were very helpful? And maybe I'll start doing that. The first, do what you've seen works, and later on worry about, figuring out your own style. And so I think, to the extent that you've had training experiences, mentoring experiences, and thought, here, sit down and say, what was helpful for me? And start by offering those. If you feel like you have nothing else available, just pair it. And that might get you at least started. And then you can start figuring some of this other stuff out.
Well, Aiden, I will say I agree totally with you. And the other thing that's helped me is to think about things that people have said to me that didn't really help. And I said, nope, never doing that. And so I've also learned
I wouldn't know
that
anything
way.
about that.
Oh,
No.
I'm sure.
I'm just kidding.
We've all had those experiences where it's like, well, that didn't work out. And so that kind of helps you to know how we want to be treated. And, that helps.
Yeah, no, right. Put yourself in that seat. And, but I think, like Maita is saying, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to miscalculate, and we're going to do something that doesn't feel good. And, that shouldn't make you freeze, not engage in a mentoring relationship, but we all make mistakes, and being willing to acknowledge it at some point and saying, yeah, no, I dropped the ball there. Or I failed to meet or your expectations or something. Or I made a suggestion that was a bad one. And that is part of it too. And it's a cliche, but it's less about not making mistakes, but more about what do you do when they happen, because they're going to come up.
Yes, those are really good points. And actually, a question that has come up, but I guess we can make it slightly broader for here as well, is when there are potential conflict between mentor and mentee, how do you deal with that? Whether it's, there could be some practical issues that can be addressed more easily, but perhaps there are some wider, more cultural issues that are not really working. How do you address that in a way that doesn't create a conflict?
I can tell you what I do is, I just try to be very honest with people. And I've mentored quite a few people from cultures that are not, my culture. Even other Latino students, we're from different countries. So, we have different backgrounds. And I just think, you talk to each other and kind of learn and just put it out on the table, that we may, we got to celebrate our differences, right? And I mean, that's what's worked for me. I don't know what others have done, but
Yeah, I think one thing that you hit on there that I think is important is making clear to the mentee that there can be feedback that goes the other direction, and soliciting input on how things are working, whether that's done in a formal way and stopping and saying, hey, how are things going? Are there things that you know, saying at the end of the first month or the end of the second month, or just if you occasionally ask. But I think that will address potential mismatches, or hopefully earlier rather than later. There's also how else will you know if you don't ask? You know, a lot of trainees are trepidatious or concerned or scared to give feedback the other direction, and understandably so. You know, not everyone's open to it, and there's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a power differential in mentoring relationships.
Mhm.
And so, you know, I think to the extent that especially if there's a clear mismatch that, you know, whether it be cultural or whether it be generational or something else, which maybe generational is just a subset of cultural differences, I don't know. But that's when you need to pay more attention. Otherwise, when there's much more perceived similarities, you can perhaps make some more assumptions. Oh, that's always risky, I guess.
Yeah, that all makes sense. I have just going slightly back to something we mentioned earlier, but about when it's appropriate to ask for a mentor. Someone was asking whether it's appropriate to ask someone to help with the revision of an article after it had been they had been asked to revise and resubmit. And if so, how do you approach someone for that particular objective?
Well, I mean, I would kind of go back to some of the definitions that we offered at the beginning. You know, there are some things that maybe are not best served by a mentor. Maybe you need to hire an editor. You know, maybe you need to hire somebody who is a writing coach. And, you know, to expect someone to do that as a volunteer, you know, as a mentor, you know, is really not, you know, the right, you know, kind of expectation. You know, whereas, you know, to me, it would be more, you know, something like that where it's you know, more of a specific task oriented thing that, you know, that's in general, you know, not what a mentor necessarily does. You know, that it might be more like saying, well, you know, gee, I'm struggling with, you know, this stage of the writing process. I keep getting bogged down. You know, maybe I need a mentor to help me, you know, look at my writing process, look at my you know, approach to this work, and build, you know, what does a scholar, how does a scholar deal with these things? You know, how do you deal with it personally? How do you deal with, rather than say, you know, I've got a, you know, a set of tasks where, you know, that might not be the right, I mean, certainly I'm not ruling, you know, there's all sorts of possibilities. Maybe, you know, somebody that, you know, would be willing to help you with that. But I think that maybe that's not exactly what, you know, a mentor would do. It sounds more like, you know, what a writing coach or an editor would do.
I agree. I think that's a good point. Although when the question was first posed, I also thought of times when there, due to the nature of the revision, for instance, there was a quantitative issue that was that the author didn't realize in advance, and then it came up in review, and they didn't know how to do it, and so even though it was, you know, the project was well beyond midstream, the data were analyzed, the data were collected, and now we're already in the process of publication, but they still came to me and said, hey, would you be able to join in and provide some guidance and and feedback on what I'm supposed to do here. What do these reviewers mean? What are the issues? And so it's not maybe necessarily a perfect fit for the question, because I already had somewhat of a relationship with this this author that was mentorly, but that sort of thing has happened to me too. It's different from what Janet was talking about, more related to maybe a very specific context or a very specific piece of input that you might need. This one was a little bit broader, a little bit more, will you sit down with me and help me figure out what's going on here and how to improve it? But it was different from some of the other stuff that we talked about, and it came in midstream. It was and it was not the way things typically progress with a publication, for instance. So
I have to say, I've helped especially new authors, that maybe submit something that wasn't quite ready to be submitted, and then they get all this feedback, and they don't know what to do with it, or they're devastated, and so my role has been more to try to help them. How do you pick that up and either start over, or just kind of, maybe that is a coaching role, but I think it's somewhat of a mentoring role too, especially for new authors. A lot of people I can remember being a brand new author. The first manuscript I sent in it was a long time ago, things came on paper. I remember sticking it in a drawer for weeks. And finally, then one of my professors, coached me and mentored me and said, no, dig that back out and let's work on it. Because I didn't know what I was doing. I was like a master's student, and I just thought, you sent in an article, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I really love to mentor new authors, because I remember being in that role, and if that person hadn't taken the time to help me, I wouldn't be on this panel today. I probably, would have gone a different direction. So anyway.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for perhaps one more question. So I can see there is one here about authorship. So must mentors be added to publication authorship after coaching mentees and putting up successful articles? What is your advice there?
You get to a point in your career where you don't really need any more publications. So I think it depends on where the mentor is and the mentor. And of course, it has to do with how much does the mentor add? Are you really adding content / substance versus your coaching? So that's just that's what I do.
Yeah, I agree.
Sorry. But just to chime in there, I think it's also reminding ourselves of the 4 criteria of what makes an author. So we can share those specific points with everyone after the webinar today. But if your mentor meets all 4 criteria for being an author, you could list them as an author from that perspective. Otherwise, I'm sure they would be happy with being in the acknowledgements as a thank you for just some of that guidance. So without knowing the specific situation that someone's asking this question, the acknowledgements is probably the best place. But of course, you can take a look if they do meet all 4 criteria for authorship.
And I think, again, this would be something that you might want to discuss, if you're approaching someone as Meta was describing, in the context of a mentoring relationship, to work on a specific publishing project, then that's something that you might want to discuss in advance. How do you feel about, do you want to be named on this or not? Here's what I think, and clarify that up front. But I agree, with what Meta said to begin with. If you're just encouraging someone, coaching them, kind of patting them on the back, etc., but you're not adding to the content of the writing, then to me, it's not appropriate to add their name.
Thank you all for that. I think we are now at time, so thank you very much for your questions. And I'm just going to hand it over to Jessica just for some final words.
I was on mute there. So just wanted to say a very big thank you to the panelists here today. Thank you for taking the time to share your expertise and insight. As Maria mentioned, for any questions we did not get to, we'll be following up with you after the webinar. The recording will be shared with attendees and registrants. I just wanted to remind you that the next webinar we have coming up is on September 21st, and this will be looking at navigating the peer review process from an author perspective. So how long does it take for the manuscript to go through peer review? How can you better outline your paper to ensure all goes smoothly? Single or double anonymous peer review, what does that mean? And different things to look for there. Also, as we continue through the year, we have a few more in 2022 with many more planned in 2023. These resources will also be shared. As Janet mentioned, we have put together a little packet of additional resources on mentoring, mentor-mentee relationships. So we encourage you to visit those resources we will be sharing following this presentation. We've already gone through your questions, so just to end here and say thank you for everyone on this panel today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.